You found the skeleton. How would you calculate the represents? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on that.
Hey everybody, welcome to Kent with Bent pre-recorded 3. We are coming at you not live because we are, where are we right now, Ben?
We are in the Grand Canyon,
That's
inside
right.
of it, or
Oh.
at it, or really close to it. Yeah.
Yeah, we're within a very short distance of the Grand
And
Canyon.
it's great. I wish you guys could be here.
Yeah. I mean, I guess they could be if they just hopped on a plane or drove.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, they could.
if you're not here, it's your fault, guys. Well, there are also
True.
travel restrictions still going, I think. So, I guess for our international viewers, which is actually a lot, sorry, maybe next year. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe next year.
So anyway, for those people who don't remember, because it's been months since we had one of these, because it's been months since we needed one, we're doing the 100 Reasons That Evolution Is So Stupid. And yes, I know Aaron Ra is covering it now, and I know that Logic covered it back in the day, and he didn't finish it, but whatever. I don't care. It's just something that is easy to jump back into. So that's what we're doing. So let's go over quickly the drinking rules. 1, we drink whenever Kent Hovind says something that is just so stupid we kind of have to, or it will hurt our brains. We drink whenever Kent Hovind gets something unambiguously right that he isn't just quoting. We also drink whenever Kent Hovind tells a joke that doesn't land. Normally we have some random drink triggers, but because this is pre-recorded, it's less fun, so I'm not even going to bother. We also drink whenever one of us makes a prediction, and we'll call it as a drink. And I've decided just recently to add a new one. Whenever Kent Hovind decides to go into anything to do with the National Socialist German Workers' Party that is apropos of nothing, we're going to drink for that too, because he likes to do that a lot. And if you don't know what the National Socialist German Workers' Party is, I don't know, read a book.
Yeah. That's
fun.
probably a good idea.
Yeah.
I don't think you mentioned the shower thoughts rule.
Oh yeah, stories
when Kent tells a story that didn't happen.
Yeah.
It's always a professor he's sitting next to on a plane. Because look, I've been on probably not as many flights as Kent, but I've been on quite a few. And there's one thing that's true about every plane flight. There's always a crying baby, and there's always a professor right next to you.
Yeah, that's been my experience, definitely.
Wait a minute. No. But the first part, yes, there's always a crying baby.
All right, well, we're just going to dive into it. When we last left off, Kent Hovind was telling us that there is no such thing as a primitive unicellular organism. I don't know why he pronounces it that way.
Because unicellular is a funny word, I guess.
I guess that's true. All right, here we go.
One single cell is more complex than a space shuttle. There's no such thing as a primitive single-celled organism. We talk about that on video number 4 of our series.
I like that every single one of these is just a commercial. But here's one of the things, right? The single-celled organisms that exist now exist as a result of like 3.5 billion years of evolution. Right? The first cellular life was not the current cellular life.
Right.
And
unicellular.
Right. And it's also the case that primitive doesn't mean what Kent Hovind thinks it means, right? And this is one of the reasons why scientists have been moving away from the words primitive and advanced and towards the words basal and derived, right? So when something is called primitive in older scientific works, what we mean is it's closer in terms of overall morphology and function and chemistry and all that thing to the ancestral state of an organism, right? So in terms of basal versus primitive and advanced versus derived, you could say that having 2 eyes is primitive for humans, because it is. Because to find where they got 2 eyes, you have to go way back in ancestry. Way, way back. Probably down to like the crown of Chordata, right? Whereas I could say that relative to all of chordates, humans having fingernails is extremely advanced. But that doesn't mean fingernails are fancy or anything. It just means that you don't have to go very far back before you get to the point where fingernails evolved from claws. So Kent is taking his judgment call about, oh, primitive means simple and bad. That's not what it means. We actually do have a lot of primitive unicellular organisms in the sense that they have a lot of features that are very similar to features that you might find very far back in evolution. So, for instance, we still have stromatolites growing that are, as far as we can tell, basically the same thing as was growing billions of years ago. Those are primitive. That doesn't make them simple, though. I just wanted to put that in there because Kent likes to conflate those terms.
He really has a misunderstanding, and I kind of get it because they're obviously primitive has more than one meaning in the English language. But it's one thing to have that misunderstanding that I would say a layperson like me might have, because I know a lot about cytology, but I don't know a lot about evolutionary biology. The difference there, obviously, is someone's pretending to be an expert and teaching on it,
right?
And refuses any and all correction from everyone's wrong but me. All the experts are wrong but me. That whole mentality is just absurd. It's absurd.
Yeah, and that's why I hold Kent Hovind to the standards of a scientist, because that's the kind of thing he's claiming to be.
He's claiming to be a scientist, and he's obviously has so many hours of material out there teaching science, like proclaiming that he's teaching real science as if it were true, including cyanide inside of apricot seeds, right? Like there's a huge difference there with being wrong on something versus spreading that out in a dangerous way.
I agree. Let's see what else we get in here.
But he says, all the forms of life are descended from a common ancestor found in a population of primitive unicellular organisms. What were those first cells like? How do we know? What events led up to their formation? No traces of those events remain. Did you catch that? Hey, kid, we know what happened, but there's no proof.
So I'm going to take a quick drink. Okay. Also, I actually did put alcohol in this drink, and it's like 9:35 a.m. when we're recording this, and I don't enjoy this. But I just want to put that out there. Like, I'm suffering for you guys. And just like,
I don't know what you're talking about. Where I'm at, it is insert local time here, just like normal.
So the reason that we know that the first life must have occurred at some point is twofold. One, everyone, even Kent, agrees that there was a time before life. So something happened, and now there is. And the other thing is, we know, as well as we can know anything in biology, that all extant life that we've ever found on Earth is related to all the rest of it. Universal common descent is at this point an extremely well-supported hypothesis.
That's through things like genetics,
morphology, the fossil record, all that.
And when you say the fossil record, you mean, since that's not a real thing according to Kent, you mean the record of all the fossils we found?
Yes. Yeah. And they're
which for some reason can't be called a fossil record.
Right. And it all correlates with where they're found, both vertically as well as geographically, all that stuff. All corresponds very nicely to universal common descent being true.
And it all correlates with all the other fields, including the genetic tests on it. Wow.
It correlates with genetics, it correlates with radiometric dating, with astronomy, all this stuff. It all lines up as if it were all true at the same time. As if the universe actually has a particular history and we can investigate it.
Okay, interesting.
Now, the thing is, if you take those two things together, it means that it's a logical requirement for there to have been a first life, and for at some point, maybe not that first organism, but some population to become the last universal common ancestor. So, the only way to say that this is not a reasonable supposition is to get rid of either universal common ancestry, or you could try to get rid of things like, the age of the Earth. And Kent tries to do both. But he can't simply say, well, this thing that is a logical consequence of basically the conclusions of science is silly because we don't have direct evidence for it. Well, I mean, okay, yeah, that's true. We don't have direct evidence for what happened around abiogenesis or direct, like, fossils of Luca, the last universal common ancestor. But that doesn't mean it's silly to propose those things, because they're logical necessities based on what we already know. And that's just what I wanted to say, is that, yeah, you don't get to complain when someone says, as a logical necessity, this must be true. Unless you can find a reason it's not a logical necessity.
Right.
So, here we go.
Primitive, huh? This one says, the humans, mammals, birds, crocodiles, all had a common ancestor.
I want to take a look at how much I like this.
Oh.
So I don't like that reptiles are at the base of this tree. I don't like that. Yeah, it has dinosaurs as more closely related
Well,
to humans than
I went left to
ichthyosaurs.
right. It has dinosaurs, birds, dinosaurs again.
Yeah, no, this is terrible. It has pterosaurs as a kind of dinosaur. No.
I love it. I love it. Not for accuracy, but
Yeah,
for artistic interpretation.
a lot about this is very bad. Yeah. That's not great. Oof.
It's not.
All right. Oh, it also has ichthyosaurs as just as related to turtles as plesiosaurs? No. Plesiosaurs
Glad
are
I
much
don't.
more closely related to turtles than they are to ichthyosaurs.
Probably true.
Man. Yeah, this is a really bad chart. But
Health
maybe in
biology 1991? Come on, guys.
Yeah, well, maybe 1991 it wasn't such a bad idea. Although I don't
Maybe,
know.
but
Imagine thinking pterosaurs are more closely related to most theropods than birds are. Like,
I don't understand the concept of having dinosaurs twice. And I know it's different. You know, I think the Stegosaurus or something similar to that I'm seeing on the left
yeah, it's
was
supposed
much
to be a Stegosaurus.
older.
What they're trying to do is
Than
they're
like
trying
the
to
T-Rex or whatever.
they're trying to
But-
split up Ornithischia from Saurischia, and they're having Saurischia represented by birds, dinosaurs, but also weirdly pterosaurs. But pterosaurs are not Saurischian dinosaurs. They're not dinosaurs.
What?
So if they had replaced, like, basically if they swapped pterosaurs and the Stegosaurus, then the chart would probably be okay-ish, except birds would still be basically branching to both, which is wrong. So yeah, it's a mess. But
And
this
I
is
still don't like having dinosaurs listed twice.
Yeah, no.
It's way too ambiguous.
technically they're listed 3 times.
Well, yeah, but I'm just saying, like, the word dinosaurs itself,
Yeah.
I see it twice, and I feel like that's gonna make, I don't know, whoever's looking at this junior high textbook or whatever this is and think this is stupid. They have dinosaurs twice, you know?
Yeah.
Of course.
So do
Make it
better
sound
next time,
stupid,
health
it's gonna seem
biology.
Stupid, but
All right, here we go.
Well, anything inside that circle is religious speculation.
The existence of dinosaurs, pterosaurs, plesiosaurs, and ichthyosaurs is apparently religious speculation, according to Kent. Which is, I'm going to take a drink. And it's not speculation. Okay, pretending
he might
that
not
this,
mean the existence of them, or he might mean the relationship between
Right.
them.
And the thing is,
Evolutionary.
let's pretend that this tree is actually more accurate, right? Let's just pretend that we don't have the problems that we actually do with it. Whatever. It's not that it's speculation, it's that there are various hypotheses which are tested and then well confirmed. So, for instance, it's not just speculation that birds are dinosaurs. We've tested their morphology, we've tested the genetics based on to other groups of organisms. For instance, they nest with crocodilians inside of reptilia, with the squamates like the tuatara lizards and, well, I was going to say lizards and snakes, but snakes are lizards, people. It's time to stop pretending they're not. Snakes are more closely related to some lizards than they are to other lizards, which nest them inside lizards. So, take that. Anyway, so the genetics checks out as them being at least archosaurs. We have all the fossils of feathered dinosaurs. We know which groups of dinosaurs are closer to birds. You know, we can go through, okay, well, they're Saurischians, they're theropods, they're tetanurans, they're coelurosaurs, they're Maniraptoriformes, they're Maniraptorans, they're Eumaniraptorans, they're Ornithurans, all the way through. All of this is well supported by actual data. And sure, at one point, back when Darwin was making the speculation that maybe birds are dinosaurs, that was speculative, but it has since been evidenced. There we go.
It is stupid. Reptiles produce reptiles, dogs produce dogs, people produce people, and there's never been an exception to that.
Correct. As predicted by evolution. So we'll take
Yep.
a drink for being
So
correct. As predicted and required by evolution, you can't give birth to something that isn't your descendants. Yay!
I think it's called the law of monophyly.
Right.
Oh god, I'm so glad I got that right.
You did. Good job.
I would have been so embarrassed in front of the insert number of people watching right now. I might keep doing that the whole time. I don't know. We'll see.
That's fine.
Darwin said, though, if my theory be true, here's his book right here.
Yeah.
You can look on page 211. He said, if my theory be true, numberless intermediate varieties must assuredly have existed. Oh, you're right about that, Charlie. I mean, to change from a rock to a dog would take a few changes.
That's true. That would take a few changes, but that is an absurdity that is completely off topic, Kent.
Yeah.
Or does he think it's on topic?
He thinks that evolution teaches that things evolved from rocks. So we're going to take a drink for life evolving from rocks, which is not anything.
I just took
Oh, okay.
2 sips because there's probably like 5 sips worth of stupid in there. Listen, this is a tea right now. I don't want anyone to overdrink.
Okay.
So, yeah.
David Robb, who believes in evolution very strongly, says, in the years after Darwin, his advocates hoped to find predictable progressions. In general, these have not been found, yet the optimism has died hard, and some pure fantasy has crept into textbooks.
I have I have nothing to say about some 1981 textbook. I really don't. It's irrelevant. Even when this was given, that textbook was over 20 years old, and we have numerous more intermediaries found now. And the thing is, the fossil record is spotty. We can't actually expect to find, for sure, given intermediates between different, morphotypes, I suppose, that you find now. But the fact is that we do find them, and every one that we find is icing on the cake of evolution, but it's actually not really that vital. Evolution primarily rests on the twin-nested hierarchies of morphology and genetics. So even if there were not a single fossil in the world, we would know that evolution was true. We just wouldn't know exactly what organisms would have looked like back in the past. So we would know that crocodiles and birds shared a more recent common ancestor with each other than they did with lizards. But what that ancestor looked like, we wouldn't know. As it turns out, we do have fossils, so we know it probably looked something like Euparkeria, which is a early archosauriform. Very early. Great, now we know. But even without those fossils, we would still know that something kind of reptile-y is what gave rise to both crocodilians and birds in the modern day. So.
You're kidding. Fantasy in our textbooks? Oh, yep. They tell the kids they have evidence of evolution from fossils. I don't think so. That is stupid, okay? If you find a fossil in the dirt, all you know is it died.
That's all you know, Kent.
You don't know.
Yeah, we're going to take a drink for how stupid that is. Okay, so. First, you know it was alive. You know it was part of a population, because all organisms are part of a population. Even when you have, like, the last white rhino on Earth, it wasn't always the last white rhino on Earth. It was originally part of a population. Right? Like, you don't have just, like, monsters that pop out of nowhere and they're one of a kind. Right. So we know that there was a reproducing population. We can tell things from the actual fossil about things like life behavior, biomechanics. We can preclude certain things. We can tell things about diets based on things like what teeth there are, or even in some cases preserved gut contents. So for instance, the hadrosaur Leonardo has preserved gut contents that can be very, very highly confirmed to be the actual last meal of the animal. So we know what it was eating, right? We also find skeletons inside the guts of other fossils. So we know that, well, this thing ate this lizard or this whatever, right? We can tell what they were eating. We can tell based on the depositional environment, in some cases, how they died. We can tell what kinds of injuries they were prone to. Dinosaurs are actually really great for pathologies in bones, because the way that their immune system works is basically whenever there's any kind of infection, it rapidly creates a cyst and just isolates that thing until they just kind of starve. But then the cyst tends to persist as scar tissue, even on bone. So you get these little kind of gnarly looking bumps on bones where there has been some kind of like fracture or infection at that point. So we can tell what kinds of common injuries there were. So for instance, with animals like tyrannosaurs, we know that they fractured their toes kind of a lot because we get a lot of cysts around there. With animals, there's a great example of a bone pathology in the rib cage of a stegosaur in the was it Denver Museum of Natural History? I don't think that's what it's called, but it's the museum over there. At least I think that's the museum I'm thinking of. Doesn't matter. But there's a great stegosaur with a nice fractured rib that healed in life, so we can tell that they were taking injuries to their flanks. Maybe it was from predators. Maybe it was from interspecific combat. We can tell what kind of animal it is, based on things like the skull, the rib cage, the hips, all of this stuff, right? We can tell all of this. We don't just have to say, oh, something died. That's not it. Yeah. So, here we go.
Oh, that it had any kids.
You don't need to. Okay, so, and we'll let him finish this.
Do you? And you sure don't know that it had different kids. I mean, think about it. You're in a court of law. You bring in a bone to the judge.
What does it mean, different kids?
He
Like
basically
more than
means,
one?
he basically is apparently thinking that evolution is going to occur noticeably from one generation to the next within the actual offspring of a given organism. Which, no. And here's the other thing, right? There's a reason why when we do phylogenetics and cladistics, we don't put any of the taxa being evaluated at the nodes. They're all at branches, right? And it's because chances are that what you found isn't actually the direct ancestor of what came after. And there are only a few exceptions to this, right? So, for instance, we know that we have very good reason to think that the two species of Triceratops, one replaced the other smoothly through geological time. And we're basically, they're just like morphotype species as opposed to actually like distinct populations that came about at different times and one replaced the other. Because we have smooth morphological transition throughout, the Maastrichtian, basically, and a little bit earlier. So in cases like that, yeah, we can kind of say, yeah, we're pretty sure this evolved into this directly. But for the most part, you're much more likely to find a sort of cousin, right? Instead of the actual direct ancestor. So it's sort of like, let's say you had one of those genetic tests done, right? And it turns out, okay, you have a lot of ancestry that seems to stem from, like, it doesn't really matter where. Let's say it's just Russia, right? Okay, and in particular, some rural part of Russia. And so you go out there, and I'm like, oh, okay, well, you're looking for the bones of your ancestors. It's like, well, there's a graveyard. And you can do things like dig through and test to see what around what time the bones were, buried and whatnot. And you find some skeletons, which, on genetic testing, are similar to you, and they're buried at about the right time to be your ancestors. But they could also just as easily be like your cousins or your great whatever uncles, right? So you can say, okay, these are related to me, and they can show some aspect of what my ancestors were like. But can I say for certain this is my grandfather? Probably not. Right? It's a similar thing with this. We know what we would expect based on modern animals as well as the fossil record when we look for something that would represent the common ancestor of two organisms. But when we find that organism that matches that description, we don't know for certain if that's the actual ancestor. And it's why we don't care if any particular organism reproduced. Because one, it doesn't necessarily have to be the direct ancestor lineage to be transitional. And two, even if the ancestor lineage is correct, that individual isn't really important to the story overall, because like Ben said, evolution doesn't happen to individuals, it happens to, Ben?
Populations.
Exactly.
I learned that from being on Kent with Bent. If you guys watch the back catalog, you'll see at some point, I don't remember when, but you'll see when that clicks in my head somewhere in there. Because it happened. Same with law of monophyly, by the way. I knew it as a concept, but I couldn't remember what it was called because I didn't learn about this stuff.
Yeah.
The YEC school I went to in high school didn't teach it, and we did a little bit of evolution in college, but not much. I mean, yeah, I don't know. Doesn't matter. I learned it from watching Kent be, lie about it, basically.
And having me around to fix it.
And having you around to fix it in the chat, which has been great.
Thank you, chat. I know that we can't see your chat up on screen here, but that's because we're at like the big.
We're at the Grand Canyon.
Oh, the Grand Canyon. So it's not the big gulch.
Something like that, and we couldn't see it all the way back now.
Right, even though it is now.
It is now.
It's very confusing.
It doesn't. I don't know.
Here we go.
Judge, I found this bone in the dirt. This is the ancestor of all the humans today.
No one would ever say that. That's not how it works. I guarantee you, no serious scientist will ever, the paleoanthropologist in this case, is ever going to dig up a skeleton and declare that this is in fact like mitochondrial Eve, or like the most recent, or like what would be mitochondrial Eve if you took into account all hominins or something. Like, no. Because it's not important that you find that one specimen. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say that that's a pretty lazy straw man, but then I started thinking about it. Like, I couldn't come up with straw mans that well. Because, once you know the truth and you understand how evolution actually works to a degree that is at least somewhat accurate, even if it's not in depth, versus the YC views, which are just completely inaccurate and do seem crazy. Yeah, I lost my train of thought with how ridiculous that is, but
All right.
They would laugh at you.
Yes, they would. I'll take a drink for that.
You don't know that that's the ancestor of anybody.
The straw man thing. I remember the train of thought.
Mm.
When you understand how things really work, I still understand a lot of the mindset that Kent spews out because I was in it for so long. But when you understand how it works, I think it's hard to create a straw man that's that ridiculous. Like, you have to be pretty creative. And I'm not creative in lying. I guess I don't have nearly as much practice as Kent does.
Oh, speaking of Kent and his shady behavior, we've probably already mentioned it on a live Kent with Ben, but I just want to say that we're recording this on the 23rd, 2 days after his conviction for domestic abuse. So I hope that Kent is probably going to be in jail by the time we air this. So Kent, I hope you're having a whole lot of fun in jail for putting your ex in the hospital. Yeah. Yeah.
I want to say it's my brother's birthday. Recording this. Happy birthday, youngest brother whose name I don't know if he cares if I mention. So it starts with a consonant.
Whoa. Technically all English words start with consonants if you count the glottal stop.
I could count it, but I don't know if I'd count it as a count.
Fair enough. All right, here we go.
And why on earth would you think a bone in the dirt can do something animals today cannot do? Animals today can only produce the same kind, right?
Well, ignoring for the...
Anyone thinks that bones in the dirt are producing anything, Ken.
Right. And the other thing is that the process of evolution isn't doing anything that animals aren't doing now, right? Tyrannosaurs were giving birth or laying eggs that would hatch into tyrannosaurs. And all through time, it's the law of monophyly again. Everything has always reproduced whatever it was, and its descendants will always do that, no matter how much they change. That's why whales, even though they kind of look like fish, are still mammals, and they're still artiodactyls, just like deer are still artiodactyls. They don't look much like a typical artiodactyl, but they are artiodactyls, and we can confirm that both in terms of actual fossil records of ancient whales, as well as genetically. The things that whales are most similar to genetically are hippos, and they're artiodactyls. And hippos and whales are more similar to other artiodactyls, like camel and deer and goats and whatnot, than they are to parasadactyls, like rhinos and horses and tapirs. And together, all those are more similar to each other than they are to, say, pangolins or cats. And then all of that taken together is still more similar to each other than they are to, say, humans or rabbits. It's a nested hierarchy or something. Weird.
Like evolution's been trying to teach how long?
Since the beginning.
Probably longer than the old textbook citation of Uncle Kent never really.
Dogs produce dogs, folks.
Yep.
Luther Sunderland asked all the major evolutionists, he said, where is the evidence for evolution?
All the major evolutionists. I want to know who that is. Who gets to be on the list of major evolutionists?
The ones that aren't the minor evolution.
It's such a weird thing.
If they've been promoted to the big leagues.
Look, okay, Kent, if on the off chance that you ever watch that is exactly like me saying, "Oh, I asked all the major Christians." Who the heck are those? What is it? What are the criteria? Is like
Peter, all.
I'm just gonna take a drink for all the major evolutionists. It's so silly. But okay.
They all said, well, somebody else has it. We don't have it over here.
I don't think this actually happened. I'm gonna take a drink for things that didn't happen. And I'll tell you why in a second. Basically, any field that you go into that is related to evolution, including geology, biology, biochemistry, paleontology, comparative anatomy, any embryology, all of these have things that provide evidence for the theory of evolution. And so while you might not think that your field has the best evidence, for instance, I'm not a paleontologist, but I'm very interested in it, and I read a lot about it, and I know a fair bit about it. I don't think it has the best evidence for evolution. I actually think that's over in genetics. But no one is going to say, oh, we don't have any, unless it's like astrophysics or something, which, yeah, sure, I guess you probably don't. But like all of those fields, for instance, just in petroleum geology, you can use index fossils, which you can actually see evolve as you go vertically through the stratum or strata. And you use those to help you date various deposits so you can decide where an oil company should drill. And oil companies have billions of dollars on the line for you to be right when you're a petroleum geologist. And you have to use things like radiometric dating and evolution to make your predictions. And if you consistently get it wrong, you're not going to stay, because firing you is way cheaper than drilling dry wells, because dry wells are super expensive. And if you're in genetics, I mean, there's the nested hierarchy. There's the fact that neutral variation ends up having a higher replacement rate than selected for variation. I mean, we've got statistical analyses in genetics. We've got statistical analyses in character state-based cladistics, all over the place. So the fact that
Even the math supports it.
right, actually, there's a Giving video that's pretty good about how there was a group of scientists who did some genetic and morphology character studies on primates, including humans, to establish whether or not primates, including humans, share a common ancestry. And the numbers they got varied based on exactly what they were testing, but they were generally somewhere around, the chance of primates not sharing a common ancestry is somewhere around 1 times 10 to the negative 700 something to 1. So, yeah, the math is there. So the idea that someone would call, quote unquote, all the major evolutionists is ridiculous on the surface, because that's not a thing. But if you called any of them, they would all give you evidence from their field, and they would probably also mention evidence from other fields. So
he wrote a letter to Colin Patterson. He's the director of the British Museum of Natural History. They've got the largest fossil collection in the world. He said, Mr. Patterson, I read your book on evolution. I noticed you didn't show us the missing links. Why didn't you show us the missing links? Patterson wrote back and said, I fully agree with your comments on the lack of evolutionary transitions in my book. If I knew of any, fossil or living, I would certainly have included them. I will lay it on the line, there is not one such fossil.
So here's the problem with this. One, this letter is not actually available, and not even Patterson remembers what's in it. So I don't actually believe that this is what it said, because there's no evidence of it. And the other thing is, in Patterson's book, Evolution, he discusses numerous transitional fossils in various series. So, that's just how it is. The book in question is Evolution by Colin Patterson. I don't remember the year.
How would you insert a missing link in a book? Like, what would that even look like? Because anything you put in the book as a missing link wouldn't be considered a missing link. It would just be another example. So, like, let's say one of the 10 creatures he may have put in there, pretend it never exists, or we never had any evidence of it. We just suspected it, and then someone found it. Like, oh no, that's a missing link that's been inserted. But no, because we know about him, it can't be missing. So I think you get what I'm trying to say is, by definition, there's no possible way to ever include a missing link in a book because then it wouldn't be a missing link then.
Yeah, that's why scientists tend to use the word transitional species or transitional form. And the other thing is, even that is kind of a little odd because everything's transitional to whatever.
Everything is right.
Right.
That's the point. And that's a better way to say it, but that's kind of part of the point of what I'm trying to get at. Like, there are transitional. Everything in there is a transitional. But
Right.
you're not, if you're not going to have the ones in between that you don't have by definition. No, have those.
All right.
I feel like I'm thinking in a circle.
You might be.
There are no missing links, folks. No chain is missing.
That was a joke?
No, but people laughed.
All right, fine, whatever.
Even Stephen Gould admitted the absence of fossil evidence for intermediary stages is a persistent and nagging problem for evolution.
Oh, weird. Look at that second ellipsis right there. You guys want to know what's in that ellipsis?
What is it?
Gradualistic accounts of. Because every time a creationist quotes Stephen Jay Gould, what actually is happening is that he's arguing for punctuated equilibrium against gradualism, and the creationists just like to cut that little bit of context out because then it makes it seem like he's arguing against evolution, even though he was an evolutionary biologist who knew of many transitional fossils. But his point was
from a book called Evolution Now?
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
I mean, that's what I'm reading, so...
Also, apparently he was a Marxist, which matters for evolution for some reason. So anyway, what Gould is saying basically is, okay, look, we have transitional species going from, say, like, now this wasn't the case when he was around, but we're just going to go with it. Going from, say, like, basal artiodactyls to whales. That's pretty, we got that. But it's really hard to find, like, fossils going between, say, blue whales and right whales and humpback whales. And that's true. And he's saying the reason is because speciation at this level, this relatively recent, or not recent, relatively short timescale level, right, is actually relatively rapid. Small populations get isolated, they rapidly evolve a new morphotype, and then eventually they may end up being reintroduced to the original range, at which point what it looks like in the fossil record is a new species has simply popped out of nowhere. Because with a small isolated population, you're less likely to get fossils. But that's not to say that we don't have transitions between major groups of life, because Gould knew that we did. He was saying, how come it's really hard to find transitions between relatively closely related species? And that was his idea.
We got the theory, we know it's true, now we just need the evidence. That's the way they think about it.
No.
That's a blatant lie.
Yeah, I don't think I actually need to explain why that's a lie. I'm just going to take a drink for it being a ridiculous lie. And then we're going to continue on.
Richard Goldschmidt said, maybe the first bird hatched from a reptile egg.
Yeah, in 1940, some guy said a thing that's stupid. So this is what's called saltation. It's not punctuated equilibrium. It has essentially nothing to do with punctuated equilibrium. Saltation was the idea that perhaps there were mutations that could occur in organisms that were dramatically more noticeable than was typically observed, to the point that a bird could have hatched from something that would seem to, most people like a reptile, because birds don't seem like reptiles, even though they are. But this has never been the major theory in evolution, and it's been long discarded. And punctuated equilibrium doesn't mean that the saltational jumps happen in a generation. It means that the rate of evolution can increase in small isolated populations, which we know that it can, simply as a result of the math of population genetics. So for instance, just drift, right? Drift is the increase or decrease in allele frequency simply due to chance. Well, that kind of thing can happen faster in a smaller population. Same thing with selection, right? it's easier to notice the effects of selection on a smaller population, especially if there's strong effects, right? So, yeah, this has nothing to do with punctuated equilibrium.
Did you say that birds are reptiles?
Yes, they are.
Okay, so it's a true statement. The first bird hatched from a reptilian egg, just like
That's true.
the first me hatched from a mammalian egg, or not hatches, but like
Developed from.
I developed from a mammalian egg, which was also eukaryotic. Like, yes, things are true statements.
Yep. So I guess, well, that is a quote though, so we can't take a drink for it because it wasn't Kent's.
But like, he's gonna misrepresent it.
Actually, in my debate with him, he asked me if I'd ever seen a bird hatch from a reptile egg, and I said, actually, he said it to me off air when we were setting up the debate. And I said, yes, every bird that ever hatched from a reptile egg because birds are reptiles. Like that's how that works.
Did he say, "Do you really believe that?"
I don't think he did. I think he just laughed and said, "Okay."
Did he say any 5-year-old would think that that's ridiculous?
No.
Or any honest court of law?
We didn't have a whole lot of discussion about the actual substance. It was mostly just setting the debate up. Sorry. I don't know why I have a little bit of a cough today.
Well, Richard, I'm sorry. I don't mean to be disrespectful, but that's stupid.
I mean, I actually agree. It was pretty stupid, and that's why it's not taken seriously by anyone. Saltation, that is.
See, what's happened, these guys have looked for missing links in the fossil record. They can't find any, and so they say, well, maybe evolution happened so fast it wasn't preserved.
Nope. That's not even what...
Yes, that's why we need the millions of years for it to have happened.
Well, there's that, but that's also not what Gould was proposing. Gould wasn't proposing there were no transitional forms. He was explaining the actual occurrence of what transitions we have and why they seem to occur at certain levels of relatedness, but not so much at others. Right? It's not just there aren't any or there are lots. There's a particular pattern which is unusual given the gradualistic assumption. So, yeah, I'll take a drink because I'm thirsty. And because Ken's stupid.
Maybe a reptile laid an egg and a bird hatched out.
Yeah, every bird.
Well, who did that bird marry?
Birds don't get married.
Yeah, birds don't get married, but he's trying to claim that, okay, so if we assume saltation, like he pretends Gould does, which he didn't, then you do actually have the problem of, okay, well, if you have this massive mutation, for it to breed true, you need to have similar mutations occur in an opposite sex member of the same species at around the same time. Which, if the first one was unlikely, having them both occur at the same time is exponentially more unlikely. Which is true. That's one of the reasons why saltation has been rejected. But that doesn't occur in punctuated equilibrium. In punctuated equilibrium, at every step, you still have populations that can interbreed amongst themselves existing. It's just that one relatively small population is evolving at a relatively fast pace in an isolated area. But they can still always interbreed throughout that whole time. And now, eventually, maybe they'll become so isolated they can't interbreed with the original population. So when the two populations meet again, they can't cross. And we know that can happen because we can see it happen in real time in organisms today. And Kent Hovind accepts that reproductive isolation doesn't necessarily negate kinds, because he thinks all canines are in a kind. But guess what? You can't breed a wolf and an African painted dog. Nothing will happen. So, genetic isolation is a thing that Kent is okay with, apparently. Or at least he would have to be to hold his current ideas. But I don't think he really knows enough to actually have that idea firmly in his head. So, here we go.
Yeah. There's only about a zillion differences between a reptile and a bird. We'll get into that later sometime if we have time.
Actually, there isn't one. What there are is differences between some reptiles who aren't birds and birds. But there is no difference. It's like saying there's a difference between a dog and a mammal. Yes, there are things that make dogs unique, right? But there is no difference between a dog and a mammal, because they are mammals.
But if they want to believe that, that's perfectly fine. Here's what happened. Charlie Darwin graduated from Bible college to be a preacher.
Kind of. I believe it was Cambridge, with a degree in divinity, and it was to be a priest in the Anglican Church, which isn't exactly what Kent is saying, but whatever.
Well, look, you weren't sitting on the plane next to Chuck E. D. like Ked was.
That's
so
true.
You don't know for sure.
Chuck E. D. might have characterized it as Bible school to go be a preacher. I doubt it, but maybe.
Anglican Church in 1830. He couldn't get a job, so his dad pulled a few strings and got him a job on board HMS Beagle.
I'm just going to drink for blatant lies. In point of fact, as I think most of my audience knows, his father was against the idea, and he had to be convinced by his son-in-law, Charles' brother-in-law, that it was a good idea. And he actually, it wasn't that it was hard for him to get a job. He was actually requested multiple times to be ship's naturalists. So, yeah. And the thing is, it doesn't even matter. Nothing about the biology of Darwin actually has any relevance to the modern theory of evolution. This is of interest for purely historical, but not scientific reasons. Because Charles Darwin isn't the great prophet of evolution. He's a guy who figured some stuff out and inspired later research. And some of his ideas were right, some of them were wrong. That's it. You could erase everything about Darwin from history, and evolution would just keep on trucking.
Don't know what he looked like without the beard. So don't erase that
Okay.
from history, but
He's going to sail around the world and collect bugs.
Well, bugs and birds and skins of mammals and all sorts of stuff. But, I mean, yeah, there was bug collecting.
While he's sailing around, he stopped off at these islands right there called the Galapagos Islands. There on those islands, Charlie noticed there were 14 different varieties of finches.
wait, no, I did
Charlie,
recognize that picture of him with not much of a beard. Never mind.
Just got the mutton chops.
I just think of like the picture of him as an old man.
Yeah, that is the most famous picture of him, yeah.
Studied the birds very carefully and said, you know what? I think all these birds had a common ancestor. I bet you're right, Charlie. It was a bird.
Yeah, exactly.
No.
I'm going to take...
That checks out. That checks out.
Yep, I'm going to take a drink because I need to, before I jump into this explanation again. Yes, Ken. The common ancestor of any two birds was a bird. The common ancestor of any two amniotes was an amniote. The common ancestor of any two eukaryotes was a eukaryote, and all the way down. And you can say, oh, what if I pick two closely related eukaryotes, like, Kent Hovind and, I don't know, Joe Hovind, although I don't know if she's still using that name anymore. Anyway, yeah, that would still be a eukaryote because humans are eukaryotes, and they're never not going to be eukaryotes. Similarly, if you pick a bunch of birds, yeah, the common ancestor was a bird, and more specifically in this case, it's a tanager, which is not technically a finch, but they're closely related to finches. Whatever.
And then Charlie said in his book on page 170, he said, it is a truly wonderful fact that all animals and all plants throughout all time and space should be related to each other. Now, hold on a minute. You see 14 kinds of birds, and you conclude that birds and bananas are related.
Yeah, maybe, Kent, if you gave a good account of what was in the missing 170 pages that you didn't bother to summarize, maybe you could actually find out why he said that. Now, I will grant you, I don't actually think that the Origin of Species, which I've read, but it's been a while, makes an adequate case for universal common descent. I think it, at that point, if that's all the evidence you have, universal common descent is an option, but so is multiple descent, right? So it could be that, like, I don't know, at Darwin's day, I think it would be reasonable to say, well, maybe plants and animals don't actually share a common ancestor. Maybe they had independent origins as life. Maybe. That would have been a reasonable idea at the time. So I do think that Darwin is slightly overstating his case based on the information he had available.
So if you look at the quote, and for me, someone who likes watching a lot of astrophysics YouTube stuff, but people much smarter than me, he said all of space and time, which has implications that, I don't know, no one ever believed aliens existed. He sure seemed like he didn't, but if there's alien life out there somewhere,
yeah, it
real reason to
presumably
believe that we have a common ancestor with it.
Yeah, we presumably wouldn't.
Presumably, probably not. I mean, panspermia Could be the
Maybe.
same origin of life, but like, that. So yeah, the quote itself, if you take that aspect into it, is probably a little absurd
Yeah.
in ways that Kent doesn't realize or probably won't comment on.
But the thing
But
is, in that
I
100,
think if he understood it, he would, because clearly he doesn't
Right.
understand astrophysics at all. As we all know, he thinks the Big Bang and the nebular hypothesis.
yeah, I think that basically in that previous 170 pages that Kent likes to skip over, you can at least get to the point where you see good reasons why all animals should be related. And you can extrapolate that to all organisms, at least on Earth. So, but no, we're just going to skip from the initial observation of finches to the conclusion and forget all the other developments and thought experiments and actual experiments and other examples. None of that.
That's stupid.
Yes, Kent, your straw man version is stupid. I agree. Which I guess means I take a drink.
You should conclude that those 14 kinds of birds had a common ancestor, but that's as far as it ever goes, folks, okay?
Why? Okay, if you guys have ever seen the creationist orchard diagram that AIG likes to use, it's where, okay, we have all these separately created kinds, and then they give rise to species within the kind. But the thing is, there's always a way to shift that common ancestor point farther back, right? Like if you're like, oh, okay, all tanagers have a common ancestor. Well, why don't they have a common ancestor with finches? Why don't the finches and the tanagers have a common ancestor with, say, sparrows or hummingbirds? You can just keep pushing it back. And any point that you decide, oh no, that's not, those two groups don't have a common ancestor is arbitrary. Because the same reason that you conclude that all the tanagers on Galapagos Island are related is the exact same reason you conclude that humans and finches are related. Because they're in this nested hierarchy. And any place Kent wants to cut it off is arbitrary, and he's never, ever in decades given objective criteria that we can use to confirm the two organisms aren't related. The closest he's ever come is giving us ways to tell that yes, they are. And that's when he says things like, members of the same kind can bring forth or reproduce, and he seems to include sterile hybrids as an example, right? So mules count. Okay. Well, that can tell us, according to him, for sure, that these two organisms are related. But since he includes groups of organisms that can't interbreed in his idea of kinds, we don't know how to test if they're not related. And like we talk about sometimes, that means the idea isn't falsifiable. It's confirmable, which, okay, fine, that's something, but it's not falsifiable. You can never tell when two things aren't in the same kind, which means it's scientifically useless. There's no way to test if it's right or wrong. There's no experiment you can come up with which would result in, oh no, we know these two aren't in a kind. And you know why? It's because the only kind that seems to exist is all of life. And I'll grant you, all of life isn't going to give rise to something that isn't part of all of life.
That makes it really easy for Arc then.
Yeah. Noah only has to bring on like one cell. Actually, I did hear something where someone said that...
Joke, everyone. That was a joke.
Where someone said that
making a joke.
all of primates were a kind. I was like, okay, well, Noah being a primate, I guess that means he's like the common ancestor of like lemurs and chimpanzees and humans. That's an interesting idea for Noah.
And Ken Ham.
Well, that I can believe, because Ken Ham looks like the missing link between humans and chimpanzees. Sorry, Ken, not really.
Does Ken Ham always look like he's really old? Because I don't know if you guys have seen a movie called The Man from Earth, but maybe Ken Ham is thousands of years. Not more than 6,000 for obvious reasons, but
Obviously. Maybe. All right, here we go.
I don't know of a kind way to say it, Charlie, but that's stupid. Okay, we don't ever see a bird produce a non-bird.
Nor will we, because of Ben.
it just gets old. I have
I
to say it
know.
again and again. And I know it's the law of Monophyly, by the way.
Yay.
Listen, I've heard you explain things so many times over and over and over and over and over in this one recording, one video, and throughout the months and years of doing this. But it needs to be done. Not every time, but it needs to be done because it's the same inability to learn why you're wrong, Ken, and incorporate that. Because his entire ministry.
Oh yeah,
He
he
had
depends.
nothing left.
He depends heavily on people thinking that
He's-
he's right.
He's so wrong on just about everything. Like I can't think of too many things he's not wrong. Like he gets things right all the time throughout his wrongness. His conclusions are always wrong.
Yeah, he occasionally gets little factoids right, often on accident, but they never actually support his conclusion.
A really good job of setting up straw man premises and a kind of logical conclusion sometimes that would potentially follow the premises, at least in ways that convince his audience really well.
Yeah, well, he's not bad at rhetoric, is the thing. He's
not bad at forming deductive arguments with rhetoric, even if they're not valid or sound.
Right. All right, let's see what else we got for him.
Let's do that.
See, dogs produce dogs, and you might get quite a variety of dogs. Roses produce roses. That is called microevolution. Now, that is a fact, folks. It happens. It is observable. It is scientific. I don't think we ought to use that word, microevolution. We should just call it a variation. But they use it, so just so I qualify that, it's a lousy term. It gives what's called a
call it variation instead of microevolution.
Because he doesn't like the word evolution. But he is technically right, so I'm going to take a quick drink. But go ahead.
About what?
That these examples are microevolution, and that it is a fact.
But I just think, like, okay, the scientific community has called it microevolution, a subset of evolution. And then who said variation? The Kent Hovind?
I think other creationists also do it, but yeah, basically just the creationists.
There's no authority there at all. I mean, I could just make up a word and call it that, and it's equally invalid.
Look, it all just comes down to he doesn't like the word evolution.
And it's the same thing with his 6 types of evolution. It's never been a thing, and it won't be a thing. You can't just pretend it's a thing, Uncle Kent, no relation.
Exactly. All right, here we go.
rider effect to the rest of the 5 religious ideas of evolution. You might get a big dog or a little dog, but you're always going to get a dog when you crossbreed your dogs.
Yep. Take a drink.
And I would go so far as to say probably the dog, the wolf, and the coyote had a common ancestor.
I agree. Take a drink.
This Irish textbook shows different dogs, and it calls it divergent evolution. Oh, come on. Giving it a fancy name doesn't change a thing. It is still a dog.
Okay, and it's still divergent because they're all going in different directions morphologically. And it's still evolution because it represents changes in allele frequencies in populations that result in these different morphotypes.
I don't think divergent evolution is a very fancy name.
No, it's also, yeah.
I mean, it's, I want to say apt. It's a nice, brief 2-word description.
If you know what the word divergent means, which is not a big word, you know it. You know what divergent evolution probably is.
Which Kent doesn't seem to know.
Right.
What evolution is. I can't say he doesn't know what divergent means.
He might not.
He might not. He probably does.
Yeah, probably.
He probably does.
It's not that big a word.
He might pretend he doesn't. But yeah, it's not a fancy term. It's about as simple as you can get, I think, for what it represents.
Yeah, basically. All right, well, I think we're going to take a quick break that you guys won't have to experience because of the power of editing. All right, and we are back. That was a quick break, so let's just dive back into the Kent Hovind.
And a 3-year-old can tell you. Anybody in here 5 years old? Who's 5 years old?
Hey, don't switch it from 3 to 5.
5 years old. What's your name? Misty. Here we have a dog, a wolf, a coyote, and a banana.
Address?
I like that it's a dog, a wolf, a
That was
coyote.
a reference to Kent liking to dox people.
Yeah. Alright, so we got a dog, a wolf, a coyote, and a banana. And yes, evolution also says the banana is the odd one out. But let's say that you put in a fox. It's still the odd one out. Right? Like, what is this supposed to establish? But also, in the aftermath of my debate with Kent Hovind, I decided to try this experiment with some nieces and nephews of mine and dinosaurs and birds. And none of them could correctly identify the dinosaurs versus the birds because they're the same thing. So by Kent's own standard of show it to a little kid, I guess dinosaurs are birds. Sorry, Kent.
Why is that coyote copyright?
That's a good question.
I think the odd one out is the little boy because he's got a question over his head and not a letter inside of a circle.
Which one is not like the others?
In fact, I think it might be wolf number letter B.
Dog,
because
wolf,
it's the
coyote,
only one
and
that
banana.
doesn't really have any
Banana,
quality
all
to
right.
it.
Yeah. Oh,
All right, let's
look,
give Misty a hand.
There-
Very good.
Misty got it right.
I'll clap at a kid, but I know it's an absurd point, but the point is that I'm trying to make is that there are literally you can find anything unique in any of those.
Yeah. Although it is definitely the case that the dog, wolf, and coyote have more in common with each other than any of them
That's
do
true.
with the banana.
I know it's true. I know it's true.
But the thing is, that's sort of what we do when we're doing cladistics and things like that. We're saying, okay, so out of this group, what's the odd one out? So out of the group of the dog, the wolf, and the coyote, and the banana is the odd one out. But then let's take out the banana. Well, now the coyote's the odd man out. And so we can build a nested hierarchy even within that. And even if you replace it with all sorts of different animals, like let's say you have a wolf, a horse, an elephant, and a frog. Well, the frog's the odd man out. Then it's the elephant. And then the wolf and the horse are now nested together. And that's actually what evolution would come up with. So there really isn't any point to this exercise.
The other ones.
But yeah, cheers for Misty. I'll take a drink.
Some of these college professors can't tell.
No college professor would answer any differently than Misty, because being the odd one out of a group of four doesn't mean not being related to the group of four. So for instance, Kent Hovind thinks that all humans are related, right? But let's say he stood Bent, you with, say, your siblings, and then Eric Hovind.
Yeah, exactly.
Eric Hovind would be the odd man out.
Okay.
So what? It doesn't demonstrate anything in particular other than Eric Hovind is less related to you than your siblings are, which obviously.
Right.
Look, there's a variety of dogs, folks, and they probably had a common ancestor. It was a dog. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
It's just a dog. See, variations happen within the dog kind. You get a big dog or a little dog, but there are limits to these variations.
Oh.
Haven't the farmers been trying to breed for bigger pigs for a long time? They try to get the biggest pig they can, don't they?
No,
Do you think they'll ever get a pig?
because they don't want a pig the size of Texas. That would be too big.
Are you saying that when he says Texas, we gotta take a drink?
I'm not saying he's going to say that. I don't know.
I'll do it. I'll say when he says Texas, that's a prediction. We're
I've
gonna take a
just-
drink.
I just have heard him say things that make me think he might.
Yeah.
Pig as big as Texas.
Nope. There you go. Take a drink.
I bet there's a limit in there somewhere, isn't there?
Okay, but
I bet it's before the size of Texas.
probably. But here's the thing, though. What we're talking about now is a physical limit to the size of an organism, not a limit to genetic variation, which is what Kent needs. Right? Like, it's like saying, oh, hey, there's a limit to computing power in terms of how small we can make microchips. Yeah, well, there's also a limit to how hot you can get the computer. It's like, oh, okay. I mean, I don't disagree, but it's a completely separate topic. Yes, there is a maximum size that an animal could get to, and it's probably not much bigger than a blue whale. But so the inability to get Texas-sized pigs, who would be impossible for reasons of physics, says nothing about the ability to get pigs and other artiodactyls from the common ancestor of artiodactyls, which Kent would probably reject. Right? So
Well, I think bigger is more advanced.
yeah, he does seem to
or
think that.
less basal, more derived.
Kent does that thing where he tries to think that evolution is supposed to have like his own version of like human values as to what's cool, but it doesn't. As far as evolution is concerned, a tapeworm is no more or less cool than a human. They're just both good at making more of themselves, so they get to keep going.
For now, they're both good enough at not going extinct.
Yep.
Good job.
Way to go,
It just-
tapeworms and humans.
You get to keep not being extinct until you do, if you do.
Yep.
Mhm.
And
Roaches
no one's
become
making a
resistant.
decision on that, right? Like, no one's deciding anything. No higher power of evolution's deciding who's going extinct and who isn't. It's
Right.
not like this higher power of nature that's selecting who lives and who dies, as if nature were a deity. Not like that.
Yeah. All right, here we go. Cockroaches.
and to pesticides after a while. Do you think they'll ever become resistant to a sledgehammer? I bet there's a limit. Yeah.
Yeah, again, this is not a limit of biology. It's a limit of material science. There probably isn't a biologically available substance that would survive sledgehammer hits. So,
I mean, look, there's some pretty large animals that won't die if I hit it with a sledgehammer one time.
they'll still probably be injured.
Yeah, and I'm not saying do that. Don't ever be cruel to animals. But the point is, yeah, a cockroach, no, of course you could kill it with a sledgehammer. But what if you were trying to fight a T-Rex back in the day and you had a sledgehammer or something equivalent, right? You
Like
might
you're an
not be able to
ankylosaurus?
kill it. Yeah, exactly, right? But you might not be able to kill something with the sledgehammer, and that thing evolved to get bigger and larger and to defend itself from larger rocks that would be thrown at it or whatever, right? You know, so
Tail clubs.
I'm not saying that cockroaches are going to get huge and be resistant to sledgehammers, but I would say it's not an impossible thing based on how evolution is working. I don't know.
Maybe. And even
Cockroaches are
even if it
bigger or not,
is,
but
not overall. Some of them are big, but I don't think there's an overall size increase trend in cockroaches. It turns out being a thing that lives in people's houses, it's good to be small because it's harder to notice you. Like if cockroaches were the size of like small dogs, they would not survive well in human houses because people would kill them immediately and they couldn't
Unless
hide
you
in
had
many
a
places.
huge house where all the rooms were way too big.
Yeah. So, but again, Kent is proposing a physical limitation, but nothing about the ability or inability of cockroaches to resist sledgehammers shows us that cockroaches and, say, grasshoppers didn't share a common ancestor. Because all through that different link, no one had to resist sledgehammers in order to not go extinct. And no one evolved the ability to resist sledgehammers during that whole time. So it's a complete irrelevancy. Although I do kind of like the Kills 'Em Dead logo. It's a fun little can. Anyway.
Okay. They still produce the same kind of plant or animal. That's not evolution. That's just a variation of the same kind, okay?
Drink
And
for
the information
monophyly.
for that variety was already present in the gene pool.
So that's interesting. The information for that variation was already present. So that means that the dogs coming off the ark, remember Kent Hovind thinks that there were only 2 canines that came off that ark, had to, between them, already have all of the functional variation that you can see in modern canines. But do you see a problem with that, Bent?
I see it very differently. I see the information for the variation was already present, and I'm thinking, yeah, you basically need what, 4 nucleotides?
Yeah, so the problem there is
That's the information for variation, right?
sure, but what he is tending to mean is that basically you're just eliminating pre-existing variation in order to get these dogs, which means that all of the genes for the traits that you see in modern canines had to have been present in the original pair. But you can only get 4 variations at any given locus out of 2 animals at maximum. And we know already that there are too many variations in just domesticated dogs.
This is a callback to when math supports
Yep.
evolution.
You need more than 2 canines just to produce the variation in modern dogs, especially if you're not allowing for mutation to create new variation that can then be acted on with selection, which Kent Hovind rejects. See?
And I was getting with the math thing, I was more alluding to the time since
Right. If you have enough
blood
time.
would have been 4,400 years,
No.
millions and billions, no, millions.
Yeah,
Sorry.
that could work. There are other things about the flood that wouldn't work, but if you had enough time between it and now, then yes, you could get new variation. But Kent Hovind rejects that option because he doesn't think that mutations can cause new variations that can be selected for.
No new information is ever added. The dogs or the pigs don't learn to fly or become pink.
Okay, but
That's not,
first, pigs are pink, so they did learn to become pink. In fact, his previous picture of a pig snout was pink, but regardless, also actually, you can get pink dogs because there are some hairless dogs that have relatively pink skin. Anyway,
I think my dog has relatively skin in like her belly.
yeah. So here's the other thing though. All the different coats of dogs that he has up here, because he's got like border collies and Labradors and greyhounds and
Well,
whatnot.
those are just lines on paper.
Well, okay, but we also know that they arose through mutation. In fact, actually, you know the brachycephalic dogs like bulldogs and whatnot. We can actually trace back historically and genetically when the mutations causing those traits occurred. We know it wasn't pre-existing variation that was just already present in the ancestral wolf population. We know that for a fact. We can trace these mutations. We can take different breeds and say, okay, we know that between this year and this year, this mutation occurred and was selected for by breeders in this region. Now, can we get down to like an individual? No, usually not. But yeah, we know for a fact that new information is added because these new traits arise spontaneously as new mutations.
Okay, there's no new information added, just scrambled information. And the gene pool of the new variety is now more limited than before.
Initially, yeah. But if you kept breeding, say, we've got a Chihuahua and a Great Dane up here, if you kept breeding those two populations into larger and larger groups, mutation would cause new variation to occur. Because we already know that it had to occur in order to get animals like this. Like, if you were to weed out every single mutation, you couldn't use a wolf genome to get a Chihuahua. It's not going to work. You need those You need those mutations.
Somebody spent years crossbreeding dogs to develop a Chihuahua. All that work to make a dog that is 100% useless.
Yeah, because no one keeps dogs for companionship, Kent. I'm just going to take a drink for Kent not understanding what a pet is.
Every time he says that, I get pretty upset.
Because you own a Chihuahua?
I own 1.5 Chihuahuas and 1.5 Dachshund.
Yep.
Let's turn all the Chihuahuas in the world loose back.
People clapping that someone just said Chihuahuas are useless.
Yeah.
A lot of horrible people I just heard clap.
Yeah. Kent's audience is it's a strange thing. I'll just leave it at that.
Back into the woods. How long would they last? They'd run up to the wolf. Yep, 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 yep. Crunch.
How long would an animal that's not adapted to a new environment last in a new environment? I guess not very long. That's technically true, Kent. I'll take a drink, I guess. But it's exactly like saying, how long would polar bears last if you dropped them in the middle of the Sahara Desert? Not very long. So, Chihuahuas are adapted to a particular environment. It's being taken care of as companion animals by humans. They're really good at it. That's why there's lots of them.
I'm really not okay with Kent joking about like taking an entire breed of dog and just throwing it somewhere to get killed.
Yeah.
That's pretty evil, Kent.
Well, I think as we've realized over the years, Kent isn't big on compassion or sympathy.
No. It's not good at
Go ahead,
his
make my
neighbor
day.
as himself.
Yeah.
Unless he just hates himself,
Well, also,
which maybe he should.
so do you remember not that long ago, like maybe a few years, Kent announced that he'd been given a Jackson Chameleon that was going to keep at his Dinosaur Adventureland to talk about. Well,
I
so
don't know
it did happen a few years
I
ago.
believe you.
And
didn't know that.
his idea was, he's going to talk about how Jackson's chameleons are just baby triceratops, which is really dumb. But whatever. Now, a Jackson chameleon lives about 10 years. I now happen to know that animal is dead. Kent Hovind, as far as I can tell, is incapable of caring for a chameleon.
How long ago did he get that animal?
It couldn't have been more than 3 years.
You know it's dead?
I know it's dead because I've seen the corpse on video, preserved in formaldehyde.
Do we know how it died?
Nope.
It's possible it was neglect.
I think it's very likely that it was neglect, because I think Kent Hovind is the kind of guy who's not going to look up a care sheet for a chameleon.
Yeah,
He's just going to
unless
stick it in a
I
tank.
saw evidence that convinced me otherwise. I think that's quite likely.
I mean, look, he doesn't even care to take care of the
But,
kids
like,
on his park enough to prevent them from
Obviously,
drowning.
like, evidence would that of the opposite would change my mind completely on that, but they're not going to do an autopsy on that thing.
Well, it wasn't obviously injured. Like, it wasn't missing any big body
Yeah, but
parts.
Look, animals can have diseases and die young,
It's true.
but they can also die from neglect. And what we know about Kent, I'm telling you, what you think is a very reasonable thing to think.
Yeah.
I'm agreeing with that.
I suspect Kent just doesn't care enough about animals. We know he doesn't care enough about people to help them stay
He
alive.
doesn't care about people, including at least one of his own children.
Yep,
The one he
Kent
never
Andrew.
mentions.
Kent Andrew, the one who never gets met. The closest he ever gets to acknowledging Kent Andrew's existence is it when he does the full family photo, which he doesn't do anymore because, well, they've basically disowned him. Kent Andrew is usually in the picture. And that's it. And I also suspect that he's the one he's talking about when he says, I've got 3 kids, one of each. Because he doesn't think of Kent Andrew as either a man or a woman. I think he thinks of him as a mistake that happened that he's ashamed of. Now, am
wonder
I
if
right?
God thinks
I
that
don't
about
know.
Kent.
I hope so. Now, granted, I am reading a lot into that joke, and if you ask Kent Hovind, he might give you a completely different answer. But
Right, but it's
how it comes across.
Kent giving a different answer doesn't mean it's
Right.
true at all.
And what I'm saying is,
Especially if he talks about the story when he was on a plane next to a professor at the time.
and
Then
what
he
I'm
knows.
I'm less saying that this is what I think Kent Hovind thinks. What I'm saying is that's how the joke comes across. It comes across as Kent not thinking of his son as his son and thinking more of him as a horrible misfortune that's befallen him that he doesn't want to talk about. But anyway, here we go.
A useless dog. Genetic information was lost when you got your variation. It wasn't added. You might have selected a certain slice of the gene pool with small dog, quick characteristics, but you didn't add anything.
Yeah, but
I think of it as you didn't add or subtract anything, you rearranged nucleotide.
well, I mean,
Obviously-
that's what mutations tend to do.
Well, yeah,
And that's the
Well-
thing. You need mutations in order to get a chihuahua out of a wolf.
I know there are point mutations and there are deletions, and yeah, you can add and subtract, sure, but essentially you're rearranging nucleotides, and when it works, you have structural proteins that are different. You have, structure functions based off of structure. So, sorry, I'm getting too advanced for Kent. This is, for me, college level freshman biology. Because high school level YEC biology didn't teach this stuff. So other people, they may have learned this in high school.
All right.
Nice, good job, guys.
You selected something from the population. I come from Illinois, corn country. There are so many kinds of corn up there, they have to number them.
Okay.
You'll be driving down the highway. You'll see BX65. Don't mix it up with XL29. Something will blow up. But I'll tell you what, folks, you can crossbreed your corn from now to the cows come home, and you always get corn.
Yep. Drink for Monophyly.
You'll never get a hamster or a tomato or a whale to grow on that corn stalk, okay? It won't happen. There's a variety of cows, and they probably had a common ancestor. It was a cow.
Yep. Drink for
Variety of
Monophyly.
horses, no question. Probably the zebra and the horse had a common ancestor.
And again. Also, I want to know why this is in Spanish. It's just weird to me. Like, he has this one picture that he always shows, and it's from a Mexican textbook. I'm just like, why didn't you just use one in English? I don't know. It's just weird.
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter. But, like, also, for years, I thought that the horse labeled a caballo was, like, a muscle diagram and not just, like, a chestnut-colored horse. And I don't know if that was because I was not looking closely at it or anything, but it was only in, like, the last year that I realized, oh, no, that's a chestnut-colored horse. That's not supposed to be representing, like, a badly drawn musculature. So, that's my little embarrassing thing on this picture. Anyway.
But the kids are going to be taught in school tomorrow in your town that the horse used to have 4 toes. Well, there's some things they don't tell the kids about this Eohippus to Equus series, which has been proven wrong 50 years ago. But
Nope. Never proven wrong. Also, it was only on the front foot that there were 4 toes. The back feet were 3. So I just want to put that out about Eohippus, but it's not terribly important, so.
still is in your textbooks right here in this town. They don't tell him the original so-called horse is the size of a fox. It was a meat eater.
Okay, nope, it wasn't a meat eater. And, I mean, it does list it at 38 centimeters. So, I mean, it's right there on his own picture. It says 38 centimeters. I don't know if that's the size of a fox. I don't know, like, what our criteria for that is. But, so Kent...
It's a lot closer to the size of a fox than modern horses are.
Oh,
so
sure. But also, it's like, they don't tell the kids this. It's like, well, then why does your slide from a textbook show the height, Kent? You're lying and showing the evidence of the lie on screen. It's one of the things I hate the most about creationists is when they debunk themselves on screen.
Without realizing it.
Right. Genesis Apologetics is great at that. Remember one time they were like, look at this pie chart of reasons for fossil, mass graves. Look, floods are a big percentage. And it's like, okay, but what about the one that says drought, guys? How do you get drought-caused fossil beds in a flood? Oh, you don't? Well, then thanks for showing that on screen, because I don't have to do any work except look at what they showed you. So, yeah.
Well, you have to read and
Also,
think a little bit.
Yeah.
That's all it takes.
Just a little bit. Here we go.
And had 18 pairs of ribs. The next one had 15 pairs of ribs.
I actually don't even care if that's true, because modern horses, as well as modern humans, vary in rib count. So, okay. We know that within a kind, Kent, rib count can vary. We know within a species, rib counts can vary. Pigs have an extremely variable rib count because a lot of people have bred pigs for extra ribs. You know why? Because they're delicious. Ribs are great. So you can get more money out of a pig if it just has more ribs. So,
one of my former coworkers was born with one fewer vertebrae. And
does that result in fewer ribs?
depends on where it is. I think in
Right.
her case, I actually don't remember. It was either thoracic or lumbar. I can't remember.
No, if it's thoracic, that's probably one less rib.
I think it
rib pair.
may have been lower thoracic.
That might be one of the floating ribs is gone.
Yeah, I don't know. So, but yeah, it was a thing they didn't know about until back pain and an x-ray and like, something's off here. Oh, the count's off. Well, and I'm not saying that, obviously that's one anecdote.
But it
But-
demonstrates that rib count isn't necessarily
still like-
fixed.
Still a mammal and a eukaryote and a human.
Weird.
Yeah.
Okay, so now that we've established that rib count is not a good way to distinguish species or kinds, here we go.
A couple of trips through the buzzsaw did that. And then it miraculously grew back 19 pairs of ribs as it evolved, and then back to 18.
Okay.
They also don't tell them the whole thing's been proven wrong a long time ago.
No, it wasn't. So here's what we got.
Probably why they don't tell them that then.
We got an irrelevant claim about rib counts, which I don't even care to see if it's true or not, because it doesn't matter. And we got, they don't tell the kids that Eohippus was the size of a fox, even though in both now, because remember, we've got 0.4 meters here as the height here, whereas before we had 38 centimeters. So both of these have shown the height, and it wasn't a meat eater, so far we have, I don't like the rib counts change, even though they change within a species.
Also didn't mention the toe thing.
Well, I think he's going to do
both
that.
of these.
Well, maybe he'll do it now.
Well, maybe, but it was on the previous slide also.
Yeah.
And he didn't. I thought he was going to talk about that.
So it's like, they didn't lie to
Because-
kids about the diet. Boo. They didn't.
He led. I was going to say he led with the toe thing.
Yeah. They didn't tell kids how tall it was, even though they did. And rib counts. It's a very bad objection. But here we go. Let's see what else we got.
Like this guy says in the biology textbook. Other example like the gradual
that
evolution
source said Irish textbook. I saw a brief glimpse of
Oh,
it.
did it? Hold
So
on, let's
did
see what
that.
it said.
And then this guy says in the
left,
biology
Irish
textbook.
Come on. Let me get that. Yeah. Let's see.
Irish
Evolution of the Modern
textbook,
Horse.
page 259.
I feel like there is no such textbook as Irish textbook, but I've never been to Ireland, so maybe. Here we go. Irish textbook. Goodness. It's not how you cite a source, Kent. It's just not.
A long time ago. Like this guy says in the biology textbook, other examples like the gradual evolution of the horse have not held up under close examination. That's a polite way of saying it's proven wrong, okay?
Nope. I happen to know what this one is talking about, and it's talking about the representation of horse evolution as orthogenetic. Now, You guys might not know what orthogenesis is, right? But it was this idea.
What do you explain for the
Yeah,
audience,
for the audience.
what that means?
So orthogenesis was this idea that was popular in like the early 20th century. And the idea was some animals just get on a trajectory. They just, evolution just keeps on pushing them in one particular way, even when it becomes maladaptive. And so, for instance, maybe deer are just on a trajectory where their antlers get bigger. And eventually their antlers will just get so big that they can't lift their heads and they'll all die. And horses were just on a trajectory to lose toes. They just got stuck in a rut somehow. But it's just not true. And the thing is, the evolution of horses doesn't involve a smooth gradient with no side branches that goes from Eohippus to Equus. What actually happens is you have a whole lot of little side branches that didn't survive till today, but that are still essentially equids, the way we think of them. And there were groups that retained more toes and started to develop in different ways than the main line that would lead to horses. And so yes, there is no orthogenetic evolutionary sequence of horses. This is correct. But the mentioned organisms are still at least morphologically representative of the ancestors of modern horses going back to Eohippus.
This G.G. Simpson, back in 1950, said the example of the horse family has been unintentionally falsified. They knew 50 years ago this was false. Why did they keep that in your textbooks? This whole thing was made...
Hold on. We're going to go back a second. What's that last word in the quotation?
Orthogenetic.
Yeah, it's almost like they're not saying that the evolution of the horse has been disproved. It's that it's not orthogenetic, and pretending it is false. So I'm going to take a drink for basically, confirmed prediction.
Kent really should have put the word really and then an ellipses, and that's it.
Yeah.
End quote. At least I would have laughed at that.
Here we go. Actually, what he really should have done is just put the ellipsis after falsified. I mean, that would have at least made the quote not obviously what it is.
Then you could have looked it up a while ago, and you could be explaining that it actually says...
Oh, man.
And not to be really orthogenetic at the end.
Oh, and look, remember how I said orthogenesis was sort of a popular in the early 20th century? Here we are at the midpoint of the 20th century. We're saying, oh no, and look at the title of this. Evolutionary Determinism and the Fossil Record. So here in 1950, someone is saying, yeah, orthogenesis is stupid, but evolution is totally still a thing. Like, it's another thing. Just can't stop debunking yourself on your own damn slide, you moron. My goodness. I mean, I know you're lying.
The ultimate double agent.
I mean, I know you're lying,
Kent.
Kent.
Himself as he taught.
But, you don't have to make it so obvious. It's like you're a kid whose face is smeared in chocolate and cookie crumbs, and then you say, did you take the cookie? And the kid says, no.
No.
Yeah, you did take the cookie, Kent. Because your face is smeared in chocolate. It's a weird analogy at this point. I'm going to stop it.
Why did they keep that in your textbooks? This whole thing was made up by Othniel C. Marsh.
That works for people who think the way I do.
Also, it wasn't made up by Othniel C. Marsh. I mean, he did find horse fossils scattered around North America, which is, where horses evolved and later went extinct after having had some of their populations spread into Eurasia, which is why we still have horses, but whatever.
1874, he picked animals from all over the world.
North America.
That's a good point, because Kent does this a lot. He confuses the idea that North America is part of the world, so therefore the world was part of North America, right?
Kent has a weird sort of parochialism, yeah.
I mean, he could say all over the solar system, and it would also be stupid. And he doesn't get the difference there. He does that a lot in his arguments.
Yeah, the fossil record...
either dishonest, really stupid, or probably a combination of both.
Yeah, the fossil record of equids stops being like the evolution of four-toed to one-toed organisms long before equids spread out of North America. Equid evolution, as far as the reduction in toes to get to the modern form that we think of as horse-like, is all contained in North America. All of it. Here we go.
and put them in order the way he thought it might have happened.
But also the order in which they were found chronologically, with the law of superposition being taken into account. That's an important thing to remember.
They were never found in that order.
Wrong.
Modern horses are found in the same layers as the so-called ancient Equus or Eohippus horse.
No, that's not true. There are, however, instances of times when horses with only the one toe, which is, by the way, the middle toe, so horses are always flipping you off. That's a fun fact. There are examples of such one-toed organisms surviving with other, more basal three-toed horses, where the two side toes are basically just little dew claws that don't really do anything. But again, that's what we expect. We expect that basal forms don't have to go extinct with the a derived form coming about. We can see this
The religion of death that evolution is, that Kent likes to say.
Yeah, that doesn't actually
Nothing
require
has to die.
Yeah. So actually,
It just has to have offspring.
we have a modern example of this, right?
Mutation.
So seahorses are very highly derived fish, right? Their jaws are like basically fused together. They've got prehensile tails. They swim with their dorsal fins. The males are pregnant. None of this is typical for fish. But interestingly, there's a group of fish called pipefish. Now, pipefish don't do the male pregnancy thing. Their jaws are kind of fused together, but they also swim with their tail like normal fish. They don't have prehensile tails. And they're basically a transitional species between more, like Signathiformes, like trumpetfish and whatnot, and seahorses. And then we have sea dragons, who are a lot more like seahorses. They tend to do the male pregnancy thing, but they don't have the prehensile tails, and they still usually use their tail, their tail, for swimming most of the time. And so we have another transitional form, but they're all still alive now. And they're all in the same family, Signathidae, which means that Kent would probably think of them as the same kind, which means we can get evolution of highly derived traits like prehensile tails within a family, while the other members of the family don't gain these highly derived traits and are still extant. It's almost like evolution already knows about this. But yeah, it's still the case that Equus and Eohippus do not overlap in the fossil record. I mean, geographically they do. They just don't temporally.
They're found in the same layer. So it can't be the ancestor, that's for sure. The ancient horse is nothing but a Hyraxes, which is still alive today.
Whoa.
Okay.
I just gotta say that pronunciation, I don't think it was perfect, but it was fast.
Well, he did say it wrong. He did say Hyraxes. It's Hyraxes.
I don't think he pronounced the I. I think he said Iram, not Irium.
Oh.
But he did say it really fast, which is
So here's a few
someone who
things.
says
Though.
unicellular. That's interesting.
I'm not going to go super into it, but Hyraxes are nothing like Eohippus. They're not the same size. They don't have the same diet. They don't have the same foot structure. They don't have the same ribcage structure. They don't have the same dent formula. They don't have the same. They have very different hip bones. Hyraxes are closer to elephants than they are to horses. Hyrax has much more in common anatomically and genetically with an elephant than it does with the Hyraxes. The only thing that is similar is that they're kind of roughly the same size-ish, which is why Hyraxes was named that. That's it. It's just a coincidence.
It's not even that. It's just something that happened.
By the way, the ribs, the toes, the teeth are very different in these animals. In South America,
You mean the Hyraxes and the Hyrax? Yes, they are very different. That's why they're not the
So-
same animal, Kent.
So it's just like it, but the ribs and toes and teeth.
I'm taking a drink because that's how that came across to me, and that's.
I mean, I see words, other words that make me think this guy doesn't know how words work.
Yeah.
the fossils go exactly backwards.
Nope. So there are no South American equid fossils until modern times. And here's the other thing. Well, by modern, I don't actually mean modern in the historical sense. I mean modern in like a geological sense. Like it's very recent that any equids ever got into South America. However, there is a group of animals called Meridiungulata, which are South American ungulates, which are actually more closely related to parasidactyls than artiodactyls. So that's the odd-toed ungulates. So they're more closely related to rhinos, tapirs, and horses than they are to deer or goats. And one group of them did evolve a superficially horse-like one-toed group of animals. But again, not in some kind of reverse order. They are in the expected order, although there is overlap between animals with different numbers of toes. Again, as expected. And yeah, they're not horses.
Instead of three-toed to one-toed, it goes one-toed to three-toed in the fossil order.
Nope.
They won't talk about that much, but you check it out. That's a fact, folks.
I did check it out. I checked it out back in like the early 2000s. Turns out it was a lie.
They're never found in the order presented in the textbooks. Three-toed and one-toed gray side by side.
Yeah, probably. That last part, at least.
Plenty of information on the internet about that. Tulsa Zoo finally took out their display because so many folks complain, why do you have this horse evolution display in the zoo? It's been proven wrong 50 years ago. Take it out.
Okay, zoos aren't where science gets done. Basically, they're just a profit-making thing where some people can come and look at animals. And they try to be somewhat educational, but yeah.
Let's play a big role in keeping endangered animals
That's true. Yeah.
alive and trying to have them.
Yeah, captive
Doesn't
breeding.
always work well. Some animals don't like being in captivity. Some animals just don't like reproducing very much.
Yeah, like pandas who forget how to have sex all the time. Look, pandas are cute, but like at a certain point, I think we should just cut our losses.
It's not that difficult. All you have to do. Oh wait, eucalyptus.
You're thinking of koalas,
Oh,
who actually don't have that much trouble breeding, but what they do have trouble with is like they've all got chlamydia. Yeah. They got it from humans.
TMI.
Well,
And you folks ought to get together with your school board and say, look, on page whatever it is, 952 of our textbook, it says the horse evolved from a four-toed ancestor. Let's cut this page out.
why? It's true.
If you had a page in your textbook teaching the kids the earth was flat, would it be okay to demand that that page be removed?
I mean, maybe, but I think it would be more appropriate to say, hey, we should select an entirely new textbook. Because if it's dumb enough to say the earth is flat, or if it's dumb enough to say young earth creationism is viable, we probably don't want that in our school at all. Just a thought.
You don't have to buy a whole new book.
Yes,
Just
you
cut
do.
the page out. It won't cost the school anything. How many of you would volunteer to help cut the pages out and bring your own scissors? See? Won't cost them a dime. And you send me your book and I'll show you which pages need to be taken out.
Oh, because you're an elected member of the school board, Kent, who's authorized to actually go around and check textbooks for accuracy? No. I'm taking a
Doesn't
drink.
have to
This
be,
whole
'cause
thing.
He just knows what you need to cut out. So just ask him; he'll tell you.
I've read hundreds of them. I can find them like that. Free of charge. I'll donate my time. Peabody Museum still has the horse evolution on display.
Scissors or textbooks?
I think he's just going to donate scissors and time.
Scissors. Okay.
And yeah, of course it has this display because it's not wrong. I mean, I would prefer actually look. It looks like under the bit under what he's covered here actually does represent a non-orthogenetic version of horse evolution, even though on the left side it does seem sort of like an orthogenetic thing. So yeah, actually, I'm gonna have to go ahead and say that based on what Kent is showing me, this looks like a very nice and accurate museum display that should not be taken down.
As I stood, I've been there many times. It makes my blood boil every time I walk in that place.
You should seek medical attention if your blood is boiling, Kent.
Probably.
I'm standing there looking at
Also,
this
how are you
lie
alive?
proven wrong
Right.
50 years ago while hundreds of kids come through in school groups. The kids are never told, well, this has been proven wrong, boys and girls.
Because it hasn't.
They asked the folks at the Tulsa Zoo before they took the display down, they said, why don't you take this display down? The zoo director said, we don't have the funding to remove it. I've got all the letters back and forth on that.
For no reason.
Man, folks, there's quite a variety of horses today, okay? There's big horses and little horses.
I don't care to comment on the Tulsa Zoo thing. I just don't care.
I was in Baton Rouge, Louisiana a few months ago. Got to see where they raised the
Wait, hold on. Let's see if I can find that picture
to
again.
remove it. I've got all the letters back and forth on that. Man. Folks, there's quite a variety of horses today, okay? There's big horses and little horses.
Is Kent presenting this forced perspective camera trick as an example of horse variety?
Yes.
Okay, so, Kent, I'm going to explain something to you. Sometimes things can be far away, and when they are, they seem small, when really they're not small. they're far away. So for instance, if you had a toy horse in your hand and you looked at another horse that was far away, they might look like the same size, but they're not. And people taking pictures or making movies can take advantage of this because you produce a 2D image, so it's hard to tell how far away things are. So what you can do is you can get a low angle, make sure that you can't see too much of the floor, and stand a horse really close to the camera, and stand a guy way far back looking like he's looking at the horse, even though actually the horse is way in front of him. And you can take a picture. There's this little series of movies that use this to great effect to make the actors look like they were very short. It's called The Lord of the Rings. Did you know that Elijah Wood is actually not 2 feet tall? Isn't that weird? It just bugs me a little bit that Kent
Next,
is
you're
just
gonna
like...
tell me that Ian McKellen isn't an actual wizard.
Yeah, as it turns out, I would tell you that. Yes, he's not.
What?
It really bugs me a little bit that Kent is like, forced perspective isn't...
Sir Ian McKellen. I don't think I said
there
sir.
you go. But yeah, like...
All apologies.
This is like... never mind. It's actually not that important. It's just so dumb, and I hate it. It's such an obvious forced perspective photo, and he's like, look at this big horse.
You think
It's like a 10-foot tall horse, Kent. There are no 10-foot tall horses. And I mean at the withers, not the head. Anyway, here we go.
I was in Baton Rouge, Louisiana a few months ago. Got to see where they raised the 30-inch tall horses.
Okay.
I mean, my dog's bigger than that.
Great.
What do you do with a 30-inch horse?
They're for show. It's the same thing that you're going to do with, like, other pets. Kent seems to think that the only value...
You don't have to do anything for it to be alive, Kent.
Kent seems to be under
exist.
this impression that basically recreation and companionship are not valid reasons for people to own animals.
No. He thinks it's not a valid reason for that animal to still be alive.
Apparently. And
Could not have
like,
gone extinct.
Kent, show, curiosity, companionship, these are all reasons that people keep animals alive and keep them as pets.
Look at it, I guess is about it. And they sell them for $10,000. Sucker born every minute, I guess. But one lady wrote me a letter and said, Mr. Hovind, we crossbreed zebras,
That's because I don't want one.
Yeah.
ponies, horses, and
pay a lot
mules.
more for a guitar
Not
than-
mules, the jackass. And we raise zonkies, zorses, zeonies. They cross every which way.
Okay.
Well, that's probably
That's true. I'm going to take a drink.
because they're the original same kind.
Okay, but Kent, what about... You know what? That's where we're going to leave it for today. Because we've been recording for an hour and 50 minutes, which means this will probably turn into like an hour and a half video, and I think that's pretty good for a Kent with Bent pre-recorded. And I think the takeaway from today is that basically almost everything was just, oh, right, because of the law of monophyly. I mean, that summarizes almost everything we went over today. The only other exception is like...
Pre-recorded number, whatever.
3.
Colon, the law of monophyly.
Right. I think the only thing that we talked about that wasn't just down to the law of monophyly was orthogenesis, which Kent didn't even actually talk about. I had to, because he refused to bring it up because he was conflating orthogenesis with the modern theory of evolution. But anyway, thank you everyone for watching. Please hit like. If you're not already subscribed, do that. If you would be so kind, please turn on the bell notifications, because that way you'll always be notified when there's new Dapper Dino content. And I'm just going to leave you guys with a thank you to my channel members and patrons. Links to both of that are below this video. I just want to take a second to thank my channel members and patrons, especially those pledging $20 and above. Bob Knob, Bent Hovind, Ian Chen, Chris Love, Sphincter of Doom, The Venerable Bede, and Res Instance. My channel members and patrons help make this channel possible, and without their support, this channel really wouldn't exist. If you would like to help support the channel as a member or patron, there are links in the description to both join the channel as well as join the Patreon. Patrons and members get mentioned in these credit scenes, as well as getting early access to my scripted videos, and if you pledge $10 or above, you can also get access to various 3D assets that I create for Blender, both for use in the channel, as well as just general giveaways to my supporters to help in any Blender projects they might have. If a monthly or annual pledge isn't for you, then there is also a merch store linked in the description, and if none of that's right for you, please just like and subscribe because every like and subscription really helps the video out. Thank you.